Okay, let's try this again. A few years ago, I released a video called The Death's Head Conspiracy, where I talked about a comic book character, Death's Head, that started out in Marvel's Transformers comics before making his way to the mainline Marvel Universe by way of Doctor Who, and how this central connection ballooned out into a tangled web of contradicting crossovers. It was messy, it was chaotic, and honestly, it wasn't even a real conspiracy. There was no cover-up, no hidden truth. Yes, everything is connected, but it doesn't really connect to anything. But this time is different. I think I've uncovered an actual, real conspiracy that Marvel's been trying to keep hidden for the past 30-something years. A cover-up so monumental that its exposure could potentially shatter professional relationships going back decades. And at the center of it all, once again, is Death's Head. Buckle up, baby, because it's time we talked about the... So the whole Transformers, Marvel, Doctor Who thing is definitely the most well-known bit of trivia about Death's Head. In fact, it's probably how most people found out about the character. I know I certainly did. And the story of how this went down is actually super important to uncovering what happened. So it's time for some very important context! According to Simon Furman, writer for Marvel UK's Transformers series and co-creator of Death's Head, the character was originally supposed to be a lot more basic than he actually wound up being. Apparently Furman just needed a bounty hunter character to move the plot along, and he was really only supposed to show up in that one story arc, so he wasn't written with all that much personality. He knew he wanted this character to be named Death's Head, and he knew he wanted the design to be based on an animal skull, but that was pretty much it. So he handed what he had over to artist Jeff Sr., who sketched up a design so good that Furman immediately scrambled to rewrite the script just to punch up Death's Head's personality and make him someone that fans would actually want to see more of. And it worked! Within a year, Death's Head had shown up in another two-part story arc, which led to him having a prominent role in The Legacy of Unicron, arguably one of the single most important and influential story arcs to come out of early Transformers, an arc that pretty much defined how every future incarnation of Unicron, Primus, or the Matrix of Leadership would be depicted going forward. And at the very heart of that story is Death's Head, which I guess by association makes him one of the single most important characters in Transformers history. I really stay winning. Of course, the story ended with him jumping through an exploding time portal, Furman's way of writing him out of the book entirely. From there, he made an appearance in Doctor Who magazine, which led to an appearance in Dragon's Claws, which led to him getting his own ongoing series, and since then, bar a few more crossovers with Doctor Who, Death's Head has been a Marvel character first and foremost. But that's the kicker. His first appearance was in a Transformers comic, right? So then wouldn't it make sense for Hasbro to keep the rights to the character? Well, yes and no. See, according to Furman himself, yeah, the contract between Marvel and Hasbro specified that any characters that first appeared in a Transformers comic would be owned by Hasbro, and any characters that first appeared in a Marvel comic would be owned by Marvel, presumably so that Hasbro couldn't claim the rights to Spider-Man and Marvel couldn't lay claim to Optimus Prime or something like that. So then, how did Marvel get to keep the rights to Death's Head? Well, if you ask anyone online, they'll probably tell you the same story. Back when Furman was rewriting his script for Transformers 113, he knew he wanted to make sure Marvel got to keep the rights to the character. So he also threw together the script for a single-page comic strip about Death's Head blowing up a cowboy. He passed that script on to then up-and-coming artist Brian Hitch, who illustrated it and handed it over to Marvel UK, who published it in as many Marvel original comics as possible before the release of Transformers 113, all to ensure that Death's Head was well and truly theirs. There's just one small problem with this story. In order for this plan to have worked, the strip, called High Noon Text, would have needed to release at some point before May 16th, 1987 in a non-licensed comic book. The caveat is that the first known appearance of this strip is actually from May 28th of 1988. In a Transformers comic! I don't know about you, but I don't think that quite qualifies for a first appearance in a non-licensed book. Now, of course, there is a chance that this book isn't actually the first appearance of High Noon Text. The comic's almost 40 years old. It's entirely possible that somewhere along the way, fans lost track of the actual first appearance. But even then, there's still a hard limit on how early it could have been released. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner of the last panel, you'll see Brian Hitch's signature, which reads Hitch 88. as in 1988, as in still a year too late to have come first. Even if he had drawn this strip on January 1st of 1988, that would still be almost 7 months after the release of Transformers 113. So the story is fake. This strip isn't how Marvel kept the rights to the character, and all the fans that have been told this over the past several decades have been unknowingly misinformed. Not necessarily on purpose, it's one of those stories that gets passed around and everyone just assumes it's true because, like, why would anyone lie about that? But if it's not true, that actually begs two very important questions. First, if not High Noon Techs, how did Marvel keep the rights to Death's Head? And second, where did this rumor come from? Like, it's provably false. Anyone can check and see for themselves, and it would be weird for some fan on a forum 30 years ago to make it up for no reason. So, who actually started this rumor? Well, would you believe me if I told you it was none other than Simon Furman, co-creator of Death's Head? This is Volume 1 of the 2006 Death's Head collection. It features this really cool foreword by Furman, who talks about his love for the character, how he's evolved throughout his various appearances, and of course, his creation. It starts out with all the stuff we already knew, like how Death's Head was originally a pretty generic mercenary, or how it was Senior's amazing design that made Furman reconsider the future of the character. And then he starts talking about Hasbro's contract, and his first appearance, and High Noon Techs, and oh my god, Simon Furman created this rumor.
Characters, even peripheral ones, who appeared in Transformers were prone to being absorbed into that title's catch-all copyright. So we decided to take a leaf out of Marvel US's book and copyright the character before Transformers number 113 hit the stands. To this end, we employed up-and-coming artist Brian Hitch to draw a one-page story I'd hastily scripted, while Jeff got on the main Transformers strip. The story High Noon Techs became Death's Head's official first outing, and was subsequently published in assorted Marvel UK titles as an extra feature.
Now, when I first read this, my immediate thought wasn't, oh my god, legendary comics author Simon Furman just lied in the foreword of his book. My first thought was, okay, so obviously I missed something. It's a lot more believable that I just missed some earlier version of the strip, right? Like maybe they redrew it at some point, and that's the version we all know and love nowadays. So I started digging into it, looking for any search results related to High Noon Techs or Death's Head's first appearance, until finally I stumbled upon the TFUK appendix site, which actually has an entire page dedicated to the strip. It goes over the strip's supposed history, talking about Furman wanting to keep the rights, and how he created High Noon Techs to make sure that was possible, and all that jazz, but then goes on to mention how it's not at all true. The first appearance of the strip was definitely Transformers 167, and it was an entire year too late for that to be how it actually happened. But then it mentioned something I hadn't seen before.
When the strip was reprinted in the Furman-curated Titan Books collection Fallen Angel, Brian Hitch's artist signature was quietly edited to remove the 88 date. We're not saying Simon Furman basically blagged his way into having Marvel retain the rights to Death's Head, but if he did, then it's a move that'd make the freelance peacekeeping agent proud.
There's no way. Like, there's actually no way, right? They wouldn't actually do that. Plus, it's just a fan wiki. Anybody can edit those. It's not a reliable source of information. If only there was someone that had both Transformers 167 and the Fallen Angel graphic novel that could verify this for me. So anyways, as soon as I read this, I went over and grabbed my copies of Transformers 167 and the Fallen Angel graphic novel to verify this, and yeah, no, that's true. That's like 100% everything the wiki said was true. And just like that, this went from a weird internet rumor or a case of lost media to an actual honest-to-God conspiracy. Because you can't just lose a signature. That's not how that works. The 88 had to have been removed intentionally. And that's not all. Even this graphic novel, published just a few short years before Furman wrote that foreword, claims that this is
where it all began, with the first ever Death's Head strip.
So, to clarify, we know High Noon Techs wasn't released first. We have a pretty good idea of where it first appeared, and beyond that, we definitely know which year it was drawn in. This story is demonstrably false, and yet Simon Furman keeps talking about it like it's true, and Marvel seems to be actively erasing any proof to the contrary. This is actually starting to look more and more like a cover-up. And it's not just this one graphic novel either. Marvel Age issue 71 features a blurb from Sandy Hausler about the character, and halfway through he claims that Death's Head's first appearance was in a one-page strip in the back of Marvel UK's Transformers. At least they got the book right, but it's sorta negated by the fact that this released in 1988, the exact same year that High Noon Techs first released. They've been doing this for as long as this thing has existed! Then again, in 1990, with the release of The Life and Times of Death's Head, just 2 years after the release of the strip, Furman himself was already referring to it as
The one-page introductory story hastily prepared to make sure Death's Head escaped the licensed property trap.
Though it's worth mentioning that in this printing, the signature hadn't been modified yet. In 2012, Marvel released Volume 3 of the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe A to Z, featuring an entire 2-page spread dedicated to Death's Head. Under most circumstances, I'd be thrilled that he gets so much attention, but unfortunately it's undercut by this blurb at the top, claiming his first appearance was High Noon Tech's 1987. Like, this is Marvel, the company that made the strip. They can just check this to at least get the year right, but instead they keep claiming this came before Transformers 113. This isn't an isolated incident. It's not a one-off mistake. They keep peddling this as the real, actual story of Death's Head's creation. Everywhere I looked, I was met with the same story. It was so consistent and had been going on for so long that I almost began to wonder if I really had missed something. Maybe there really was some alternate version of High Noon Tech's released before Transformers 113, and the one we see so often nowadays is just Hitch's attempt to remake it a year later. After all, there's no way there's actually something to all this, right? Like, this is getting into proper conspiratorial territory here. This is a real professional company. There's no chance in hell they'd get away with it. So I did the only thing I could think to do. The only way I could possibly get all this out of my head and move on with my life. I found a list of every single Marvel UK comic published between January and May of 1987. I found scans of every single one of them, and I combed through each one looking for quite literally any hint of Death's Head. And you know what I found? You know what I found? Nothing! Not a single appearance of Death's Head anywhere. But you know what? Maybe that list was incomplete. Or maybe they didn't publish it in the UK. Maybe they had it published in the US just to make it even more official. So I found a list of every single comic published by Marvel between January and May of 1987. And I found scans of all those comics, and I went through the exact same process of searching for any sign of the freelance peacekeeping agent. And once again, nothing! Of course, it's at least worth mentioning that, in fairness, many of the scans I was using were incomplete. A decent chunk of them cut out all the ads and extra content entirely to focus on the main comic itself. However, one thing I noticed while reading is that the ads and bonus strips seem to be pretty consistent across most books published week to week. Nothing seems to have been released in just one comic book over the span of a week or even a month. And given that Furman's story claims it was published in as many books as possible, I think it's fair to say the same would be true of High Noon Tech's. So, while not every comic I found included all the ads, enough of them did to where if this strip really was included somewhere, I genuinely think I would have found it. And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, why? Why do all this? Why go through all the trouble of creating this massive cover-up just so you could claim that one comic came before another? And that's when that first question, from way back at the start of this video, came back to haunt me. If not High Noon Tech's, how did Marvel keep the rights to Death's Head? And as I sat there, sinking deeper into this nightmarish rabbit hole, the answer hit me. They didn't! Furman's been clear about the contract between Marvel and Hasbro. If it shows up in Transformers first, it's Hasbro's, which wouldn't be a problem if Death's Head really had made an appearance somewhere else first. But instead of just, saying where that first appearance is, they've created this massive cover story requiring basically everyone involved to lie about the order in which these comics were made, which would only be necessary if, say, Transformers 113 really was the first place he showed up, if they were so desperate to keep the rights to Death's Head that they were willing to make up a story about his creation and lie to their business partners about it. Now, it was at this point that Milton, over on Twitter, directed me to an interview that Richard Starkings, one of the editors at Marvel UK, had done for Oink Blog last year. In it, Phil Boyce asks him directly about the discrepancy. Starkings' response is, well...
I dare say that between commissioning the strip and legal establishing the trademark, his appearance in Transformers notwithstanding, we weren't able to run High Noon Tech's beforehand.
The way it's explained here, it sounds like Starkings is saying that the strip was commissioned and probably written before Transformers 113 released, but just wasn't actually illustrated or released until the next year. This, honestly, isn't a terrible explanation. However, I do have some doubts. For starters, the way Furman tells the story, it sounds a lot more like Hasbro's contract was specific about first appearances, not first commissioned work. It's why he puts such an emphasis on the fact that High Noon Tech's had to release first. But this explanation also brings up the exact same question I keep having to ask in this video. If it really was that simple, if commissioning the strip without publishing it really was enough for them to maintain a copyright on the character, then why was it so important to change the story and make it seem like it released first? If the actual release date didn't matter as long as the strip was commissioned first, then why were they crafting this cover story about his first appearance back in 1988? And hell, if the date the script was written really was enough for them to keep the license, then that still wouldn't work, because the one thing we know for sure is that the script for Transformers 113 was absolutely written before anything else. That's the whole reason we even have this situation in the first place. It's a decent explanation, Rich, but it has too many holes for my liking. So, given all this, all the obvious examples of intentionally hiding the date of this strip, the times where they've claimed that this was the first appearance of the character despite having every reason to know full well that it's not true, given this whole nightmarish mess, what do I think really happened here? Look, the truth is that we'll probably never know what actually happened behind closed doors. It's entirely possible that Marvel and Hasbro came to some sort of agreement behind the scenes, and part of the deal was to never disclose the specifics in public. It's also possible that some weird quirk of British copyright law meant that Furman and/or Marvel got to keep the rights instead of Hasbro because they were the ones that made the comic. Hell, it's entirely possible that I just missed something. Maybe my research wasn't thorough enough. Maybe there really is some secret prototype version of the strip that was released before Transformers 113, and that version's just been lost to time for whatever reason. But if any of these really were the case, then why in the world would they go through all the trouble to create a fake cover story? Because frankly, telling an untrue story is just way more suspicious than not telling the story at all. But that's just my 2 cents. Again, it's entirely possible that there is some logical explanation I've just missed. But from where I'm standing, with what I've seen, and what I know beyond a shadow of a doubt to be true, there's only one answer here with any ground at all. Marvel Comics lied about the ownership of a character they made for Hasbro, and to ensure no one caught them, they covered the entire thing up. Now look, I know that by this point it looks like I'm pretty pro-Hasbro, anti-Marvel here. I know a lot of folks have been saying for years that they wish Hasbro had gotten to keep Death's Head. And to them, I can only say, what? What on earth are you talking about? Do you know how much cool stuff Death's Head has gotten to do since he left the Transformers comics? A lot! He's been to every corner of the Marvel Universe, traveled forwards and back in time for all sorts of crazy adventures, met so many unique and interesting characters, and absolutely none of that would have happened if Hasbro had kept the rights. He never would have gotten his own solo series, are you kidding me? No, he'd still just be a secondary antagonist in the occasional Transformers story, maybe would have gotten a few episodes in animated, an arc or two in Matumti, always just fighting the same 2 factions of Cybertronians, forced to replay the same stories again and again and again. I do not want Hasbro to use this video to try and take back what's rightfully theirs or whatever. I didn't make this because I want to stir up legal drama. I did it because it's completely insane that a massive comic book company like Marvel has spent the last 40 years making up this wild fairy tale that just completely falls apart if you look at it funny. How did they get away with this for so long? That's why I made this video, not because I want to get some mega corporation in a bit of legal trouble, but because I've been burdened with this absolutely unhinged scenario. I am in agony, and the only way to be free of this is to pass the curse on to you! And to the folks at Marvel, the ones that started all this in the first place, are you listening? Because I have only one thing left to say to you. Hi. I'm sure you've been watching this video in a mixture of shock, anger, and bemusement. But don't worry, despite how unhinged I might have gotten in this video, the truth is that I'm sure there really is a logical explanation for all of this. Something I just missed, or that the general public might not be privy to. I'm sure that an explanation exists out there, somewhere, and I'd be happy to help you find it. And I'd love to share what I find with the world. After all, the last thing I want to do is damage the really strong relationship that you still have with Hasbro. But in order to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you really are in the clear, I'm going to need your help. All I need from you is for you to hire me to write an ongoing Death's Head series. At least 17 issues. I want to outlive Death's Head 2. That guy sucks. Put Nick Roach on art, it'll be great, I promise. Ignore the fact that if you're watching this, it means the video was already public and Hasbro could see it at any moment. That's not important. Just get in touch with me. My email is available through my YouTube channel, or honestly, you can even just shoot me like a DM on Twitter or Blue Sky or something. I'm not picky, it's whatever. I'm looking forward to hearing back from you, and I can't wait to write a comic where Death's Head becomes a Herald of Galactus or starts a union for Earth-based freelance peacekeeping agents. It'll be really cool, I promise.